Good evening. I knew it. I shouldn't have been invited here tonight. You should have included me out. I really don't belong here. I'm in one of those strange moods and I don't know where I'm going or why. But I know I can start with this. Since God is the only selfhood and there is no personal self, why does the infinite way teaching stress humanhood to such an extent? Now I wonder who said that there is no personal self. I wonder if there's anybody who really believes there is no personal self, or is it that you think that in the infinite way writings it says there is no personal self? To begin with, the infinite way writings make it very clear that the only reason there is such a thing as an infinite way teaching is that we may die daily to the personal self. If there is a major point, it is certainly that the divine self of our being is the reality and is our function in life, to return to that. The whole of the infinite way says that there was an experience that is called Adam and Eve's fall, the fall of man, or the prodigal son, that resulted in a sense of selfhood apart from God. On almost every page of the infinite way writings it says that there is only one reason for discords, and that is that a sense of separation from our God self has sprung up. And so it is that the reason the infinite way teaching stresses humanhood is that it is our humanhood that has brought us together into this room. It is our humanhood that has brought us into every classroom of where spiritual teachings are, because our human selfhood has gotten us into such troubles. Why else do we have lack or limitation? Why do we have sin and sinful desires? Why do we have disease and wars? To glorify our God self? Heaven forbid. It is all a part of the human self that must be put off. The human self that must die daily. You see, there is such a thing as God being. But are we demonstrating it? Are we showing it forth to the world? Would God's self show it forth to the world in wars, famine? Do you think it's the God self of us that is withholding rice and other foods from India and China? Do you think it's the God self of us that is battling in Israel and the Arabs? Do you think it's the God self of us that is battling the question down south of white supremacy and Negro inferiority? Do you think it's the God self of us that has taken our original American Indians and stuck them away in reservations to die of malnutrition? Why, heavens no. It is the vilest qualities of humanhood that compel us as humans, as nations, to act as we do toward each other. Is it our spiritual selfhood that burnt up Hebrews, Jewish people in Germany? Is it the demonstration of our spiritual selfhood that is now battling between communism and capitalism, or in our own land between unions and corporations? No, the reason that the Infinite Way stresses humanhood is that it stresses the need to overcome humanhood, the qualities of humanhood. As a matter of fact, it was that very thing that has been giving me a miserable hour before I got here tonight. The reason that I felt this evening that I should have been included out and let you carry on without me, because it has been so apparent that there are students in this work, even after these 3 weeks that we've had here, who seem to have no more reason for living than, well, I don't know, bookkeepers or accountants. And I suppose they have a reason some way, but I don't know what it is, because they spend all their life chasing 2 times 2 and making it become 4. The minute the miserable little thing gets out of line, they go searching up and down ledgers and pages to make it behave. I don't know why it makes such a difference whether the profit sheet is 80 cents off or the loss sheet is 60 cents off. But to an accountant, that's very important. They spend days and nights recovering their measly little 2 times 2. And I can't see why. Now, I know that there are students here who are physically well, and so far as their family relationships are concerned, they're whole and harmonious, and their supply is all right. But even after 3 weeks, they're walking around as if there wasn't a good reason for living. No joy in their faces, no joy in the shining through the souls, and every time I see it, I grieve. Because it isn't only that there should be some joy because of these humanly good things that come into our lives, especially when they've come in because of our spiritual realization, but even if there weren't any reason for rejoicing in the human picture, how can you live in the Bible? How can you live in this Infinite Way literature without finding an inner spring of bubbles? Why, it's like champagne to me. There has got to be a reason for living. There has got to be a reason for going on day after day. It isn't enough just to eat 3 meals a day and have a place to sleep at night. It isn't enough to have television and its horrors or even the good plays. There has to be an inner reason for living. There has to be some kind of an inner bubbling over, and each one of us has to find it. Now, it can be found in Scripture, and it can be found in our Infinite Way writings, because all of that, rightly understood, tends to overcome that humanhood that is so overburdened with this 4 1/4 that ought to be 4. Now, let's not get into that thing there of being so concerned about the exact letter of truth that we're afraid to deviate in our language from the way the sentences are formed in our writings or in Scripture. Let's take these statements of truth and rephrase them in our own language. I'm grateful that the Infinite Way books are written in such a way, not that I consciously had anything to do with it, but they are written in such a way as makes it very difficult to quote them. The Infinite Way writings are really not quotable statements. They're not statements that lend themselves to just spouting. They're more or less ideas which you have to accept and then rephrase according to your own understanding. And I'm glad for that, because if there's anything hard, it is that same 2x2 thing that goes around quoting exactly and then believing that because it has a meaning tied up, boxed up in certain words, that it has meaning. Let's not do that. Let's twist that Bible upside down. I know there are some ministers who've complained that I've rewritten the Bible. I really haven't. I've just taken those statements out and gotten some meaning from them that are applicable to our human existence and help us really to overcome human existence and learn about a divine existence. And so it is. Life is never a joyous thing while we live boxed in. The first horror that is presented to us is the fact that in our ordinary life we're boxed into a body. And all we're conscious of is the body from the toes up to the head and its pains and aches and pleasures. You'd think that we were really living inside of this tomb that other people call a body. It isn't a body, it's a tomb if you're living inside of it. It's only a body if you're outside using it as an instrument. But when you're inside in there, looking around at every corner of it and finding aches and pains and pleasures, it's a tomb. But get outside of it and just use it like you would an automobile. Jump in when you want to go somewhere, but jump out when you get there. Then you'll find that the body doesn't intrude itself into your experience. And it's the same with those dollar bills. Every one of us ought to enjoy as many of them as we've got, or as few, but not live inside of them as if they made life. They don't make life. God constitutes our life, and He gives us some dollar bills to play with. But you take them too seriously, and the first thing you know, you get to that checking in place, the probation court there that waits at the end of everybody's life. You have to check in all those valuables you've been playing marbles with. Now, it's all right to have them and use them and enjoy them, but to get inside of them and be counting them and looking at them and folding them up and, oh. Of course, I will say this spiritual life is a little difficult too. And I know that those around me have heard me say over and over again that in my next incarnation, I'm going to be the manager of a branch bank. You know, you have a white shirt and a white collar and a nice tie and a smile. And then when people come in and say, can I borrow $1,000? You say, no, but I'll call downtown. And that's all you've got to do is just say, no, but I'll call downtown, and keep a clean white shirt on and a smile on your face. And that's my next incarnation. No worries, no responsibilities, nothing. Just say no pleasantly. But I'll call downtown. But this incarnation, I don't have that joy, and I do have some of these periods when the smiles aren't all they should be. But I think the smiles are inside anyhow, because, well, life gives me a good thing to laugh at. And mainly because it's taken too seriously. Now let us understand this. I don't know really that the infinite way does stress humanhood so much, but it stresses the need for overcoming it. And don't let anybody say there is no humanhood, no personal humanhood, because that's all that human life is made up of. That's all this world is made up of, is the selfishness of human life. And that's why the world is in its present mess. And that is why the mystics, the seers, the saints, the spiritual revelators are trying to show us that it isn't as serious as it seems to be, nor is there a need to lie, cheat, steal, defraud in order to go through life. Now, there was a mystic and a great revelator who founded a whole new religion that has many millions of followers. His name was Nanak, and he founded the Sikhs of India. And he gave his people great wisdom, great love, great instruction. But he warned them about organizing, and he warned them about gaining too much wealth, because he said to them, wealth must have its sword. In other words, the very minute you begin to make a display, as you do witness in the church world, sometimes in other worlds, immediately the rest of the world wants it, and then you have to have a sword to defend it. And this man's wisdom was so great that for 3 generations, that is, for 3 successive leaders of the Sikhs, they did not organize, they did not build temples, they worshipped within their own beings. But inevitably there came those who decided that it would be a wonderful thing to build a temple and point to their great success. And it only took a short time until they had what is still, I guess, the most magnificent temple in all India, worth millions and millions and millions and millions of whatever coin of the realm they had. And in that same generation, the Sikhs had to form their first army. And within a few generations, they become the warrior religion of India. They had the greatest armies, they had the greatest warriors and the greatest fighters, and of course they had the greatest temples to defend. Now, that's what I mean by the human self that has to be extinguished. Before that, the human self hadn't been developed quite so humanly, and the bigger side of their life was the spiritual one, the sharing one, the living one, the giving one. And so it is, we never destroy really what you call our humanhood, but what we do is translate it into a spiritual sense of life. Physically we look the same, except that we have perhaps more of a smile more of the time. Physically we may be the same, except that we don't quite take those 2 times 2s as seriously as we did before. Probably don't care quite so much whether we pay $20 for something or 22. That is a change that takes place when the externals of life become less important and the real values of life, friendship, love, sharing, joy, become more important, and cleanliness too. I have seen some of these countries where they turn their thought inward but forget to keep the body clean outside. And they forget that in indulging their very dirt, even while they think they're spiritual, they're indulging the very humanhood that should be overcome. Now, the moment we have less attachment to the outer things of the world, that moment a greater sense of joy comes into our inner being. And that's why this whole evening tonight's mixed up. Don't expect much sense from it, because it isn't sensible, and I can promise you it doesn't look like it's going to end sensibly. Because it'll seem like a mess of contradictions. Some of our students who have heard me refer to these 2 small articles would like to know more about them and hear them, and I said that I'd read them tonight. And sure enough, when I do, you're going to say that they're full of unhappiness and sadness and all these other things that I've been talking about getting rid of, but that isn't what's in these pages. So as much as you think that there's joylessness in these pages, take my word for it, you're mistaken. You haven't caught what is in between the lines. Now, these two short articles were given to me in London on my last trip. This one, I awakened early in the morning. No, let's see, it was this one that came at 3:15 a.m. And then a few hours later, the second one. And I wrote them down just the way they came. The first one is called The Mystic Life. The start of the spiritual life is a state of self-deception. The spiritual path seems to promise peace, joy, freedom to oneself. It appears to offer God's grace to you and to me. We confidently believe that evils will not come nigh our door, that ills will miraculously fade, and abundant good will ever be our measure. Hopefully we enter the way, feeling ourselves set apart from other men, free of their trials, temptations, and fears. Truly, this must be paradise in which men walk as though angels, God-inspired, God-protected, God-sustained. And for a while, it really seems as if all this were true. We appear to flourish by our understanding. Our cup runneth over by our spirituality. In other words, we are puffed up. Here Satan enters in the form of our self, with desire for greater light, higher vision, a more saintly bearing. Our self would add to ourself more of God, more of good, more of grace. Seeking to retire even more from the world of men to have more of God, to commune more with Him, to feel more of His presence. Our self is in the ascendancy, but must diminish. And here the long nights of struggle begin. Today feeling high in spirit as if the world were ours. Tomorrow doubting and wondering. Next day plunged into an abyss, convinced that God has forsaken us. But why? Have we not lived a chaste life in the path? Have we not meditated and communed? Have we not sought to show what good things follow those who walk with Him? Why hast thou forsaken us, when we would have more of Thee? Has not our very goodness, obedience, diligence, earned for us more of Thy good? So seeks the self to glorify itself by earning more of God. So seeks the self to satisfy itself. Always the self would draw to itself more of Him, to the glory of the self. Prideful self must puff itself, even in His light. The seesaw of spiritual pride and self-dejection goes on, up and down, and sometimes around, until realization dawns. Up to now, we have been glorifying the self with God. Spiritual grace has made us vain with pride in our spiritual progress, our spiritual fruitage, our spiritual development and rewards. The self may not advance through spirit. The self may not be glorified or pleased with itself. The self may not adorn itself with gifts of life, but must don sackcloth and ashes until its extinction. Thus begins the pain and poverty of spiritual progress. Thus the dying daily starts within oneself. The way is straight and narrow. The dying self is not content to peacefully pass away, but must resist with every bit of remaining strength, succumbing to its inevitable fate. The self will not easily or quietly yield, and every day's delay is agony to the soul that would surrender itself to God. Only in the final black night is self extinguished, and God reveals itself. In this light, no self glorifies itself by God contact. No self shows forth the fruitage of the Spirit. No self remains. You see, all through this period of development, it would seem as if we, as individuals, were really becoming more spiritual, more honest, more moral, more happy. And for a long while, it is that sense that we ourselves are something better than our neighbors. It is only when, in some deep problem, that God reveals itself to us as our self, that there is no longer a self to be proud of anything or to take pride in its accomplishments or to glory over this, that, or the other thing, because that which is now our God self is the only self living in its own expression. And that which was our humanhood is extinct. There is no more personal pride, and you can tell that. You can tell it the moment it comes to you. You no longer have judgment or criticism or condemnation for the other man's sins or faults because you understand them. And your prayer always is that their eyes be opened, that they may be awakened, and above all things that they may be forgiven for their ignorance, not punished, nor held in punishment to their own offenses. You see, this probably is a continuation of this morning, in which our whole lesson was a realization of the nature of God. If you study the New Testament, and I recommended this morning that all students have a red letter New Testament. That is, a New Testament with all of the words of the Master printed in red ink, so that you can have it handy in your pocket or purse, open it, and just turn to the red printing and get so familiar with the Master's words that you will rise above your natural Hebrew leanings or teachings, because human nature is that old Mosaic nature that has a God that rewards and punishes, and it is always promising vengeance to our enemies. It is always promising annihilation to those who do wrong, and we ourselves get to the point where we actually gloat in that and rejoice that someday all the evil people will be burning up in hell. Of course, they're not going to be there at all. They're all going to be forgiven. Every one of them is going to be forgiven, because that is the nature of God, to forgive 70 times 7. No, it's our nature. We're told to forgive 70 times 7. I guess with God it must be 70 times 70 times 7. And we are never going to be held in condemnation for our sins, not even the woman taken in adultery or the thief on the cross or any other of these malefactors that are found in Scripture or in modern life. Not one of us is going to be held in condemnation or punishment for our sins, but on the contrary, if we ever come to understand a God of love, we will find forgiveness every single day, even though we sin 364 days a year. We will still find forgiveness on the 365th for this reason, that it is a part of our human nature to sin. It is a part of our human nature to be envious, jealous, malicious in one degree or another. It is a part of normal human nature to love our own children or our own families or our own nation to the exclusion of others. It is even in the nature of human nature, religious human nature, to permit ministers to pray that we be saved while our enemies be killed. Do you not see that that takes no cognizance of God, who is love, whose teaching is that we forgive, that we pray for those who despitefully use us, not pray for their death, not pray for their extinction or annihilation, pray that they be forgiven even as we want to be forgiven. Even the Lord's Prayer is a constant reminder, forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, in proportion as. And never forget that we can't be forgiven except in proportion to our forgiveness. So do you not see that the world has never really had a God at all? When it can live that kind of a life that believes in condemnation, in hell, in unforgiveness, in vengeance, in annihilation. Well, you know, you might as well take the Hebrew God or go back further and start worshiping the sun, moon, and stars because it gives us crops, and then learn to sacrifice to it when it doesn't give us crops so that it will next season. The difference between the old pagan gods and the Hebrew God, which is the God of the Christian churches, there's very little difference in them. Very little. But there is one true God, whom to know aright is life eternal, and that one true God is to be found in the life work of Christ Jesus and revealed through John. When you come into that understanding of God, so that you no longer have to influence God in your behalf, no longer have to fear God's wrath, never believe that God punishes, and never look to God for reward, then you will be coming into some measure of realization of the God of love, the God of life, the God of immortality. Now that leads us into this next article, which is on the monastic life. And again I must caution, don't take all these statements at their literal value, but read between the lines if you would see what I'm talking about. Because in this article, love is brought out, although you won't recognize it when you hear it. But this very love, which is God, that I'm talking about, that learns not to love my children or my nation or my religion, but is such an impersonal love that it makes no difference who or what it is. Love embraces it. And so this is the monastic life. cut off from all emotional attachments, knowing no deep devotion to any person or thing, one may live the monastic life while still in the world, but not of it. The monastic life is often lived with a deep concern for mankind, with the desire to uplift, serve, and sometimes save the world. Yet, there is no deep love for any individual, nor is there a need for mother, brother, wife, or friend. Many who give up the world to abide in monastery or convent find that complete separation from loved ones or from being loved is beyond their powers. There has not come to them the necessary insulation from worldly love and care. The monastic life, even when lived in the world, is completely insulated, so that there is no emotional interchange in human relationships. In this spiritual insulation, one lives a devotion to human service and spiritual regeneration, but without involvement in personal emotions. It is this spiritual insulation which makes possible the life of aloneness lived by mystics. Yes, the qualities emanating from the mystic's aloneness is the very blessing to all who touch or are touched by the mystic's life. Emotion would be a drain, depleting the spiritual power inherent in the true monastic life. It is doubtful if the monastic life can be cultivated. It is a gift of God, bestowed on those ready for the experience and always for a specific purpose. Those possessing it may have remaining hidden longings for closer companionship with those of his family or religious circle, even sometimes a deep desire for home. But he has not the capacity to enjoy these or to remain in them. These human desires are often leaks in the insulation, or a leftover from the last human experience on earth. It is this inability to fuse that makes the mystic difficult to live or work with. Always the spiritual light serves as a barrier to emotional reaction, and for the sake of his friends and relatives, it would be better for those living the monastic life to separate themselves from personal contacts. Then the impersonal life of love is lived without strain or drain upon one's resources of spiritual power. Only the emotions strain or drain the spiritual capacities, and these are absent when the monastic life is lived apart from family experience. Since all those called to the monastic life are not drawn to the monastery or convent, it is wise to thus withdraw from too close contact with ordinary human living. Many, drawn to the monastic life, retain for many years the longing for one companion, friend, parent, wife, or husband, just some one with whom to share every unfolding inner experience and outer fruitage. Eventually, even this must dissolve in the complete withdrawal into God. A dark night of the soul, which may last many weeks, brings the final release from all attachment, and the monastic life is fully lived in God. Now, all human association and relationships are as impersonal, yet as warm and tender as that of God to man. I could give you a very good illustration of that that will not make it seem quite as cold and distant as it sounds. In the early days of metaphysical healing, it wasn't an unusual thing for a practitioner to take a patient into their home for the purpose of healing them. And very often practitioners did that very thing. And of course the amount of healings that took place were not many, because the personal sense enters the picture so that the entire situation cannot be brought under control. Whereas if the practitioner remains in their own home and allows the patient to live their own life, then when a call comes for help, the practitioner, instead of responding with emotion, pity, sympathy, human help, is enabled to retire into a quiet spot in their home and get inside of God and there feel the actual presence and power of God without any mixture of human emotion, and healing takes place. I know of a practitioner who today is enormously successful, has been for many years, is perhaps one of the very best of the healer practitioners of whom I have any knowledge. And at one time, this lady was in her home dying, had been given up to die. And in seeking a change of practitioners, the husband came to my office and asked me if I would come to his home immediately. His wife was dying, and he would like me to care for her. And I told him no, that I wouldn't go to his home, that I would be glad to take care of her from my office, but that didn't satisfy him. In the depth of his human love and emotion, nothing would satisfy him except to see me probably sitting by her bedside, feeling that something was being done for her, but I had enough experience to know the uselessness of that. And so I stood my ground and said, no, I'm sorry, I will not go to your home. As a matter of fact, if I went to your home and saw your wife healed, I'd get a little bit frightened, because I have patients far out in California and across the seas, and I would feel that I had to go to their home and sit by their bedside, and I can't do that. And so if I'm to do this work and take this case, I will have to sit right here in my office and do it. And he looked upon me as a very cold and cruel individual. But that was it, and that's the way it stood, and that's the way he had to finally accept it. Well, on my way to the office the next morning, I stopped into his home and found his wife sitting up having breakfast. And a completely new picture was presented. I remained a few moments, talked with him, and then I was invited to come back on my way home that evening, and I said, oh no, this work is done. If you'd like to see me, come over to my office. Oh, but I haven't been out of bed for 2 years. Well, this is a good day to begin. And at 2 o'clock that afternoon, the lady was in my office. And she was completely and she was perfectly healed, but she was so intent on learning how it happened that for a whole year she came to me every day for instruction, and at the end of the year I let her take my office for weekends and handle the calls that came in over the telephone, and then shortly after that she went out on her own, and she has been a practitioner from 1938 or 9 to this very day, and as I say, very, very successful. But I have learned from some of her friends that she is called the coldest woman in America. She isn't cold. She isn't cold. She is intense in her love for God, for truth, and for her realization of spiritual man, but she is not going to sympathize with a human appearance. nor is she going to emotionalize over what seems to be a human appearance, because having received insulation from human emotion, it is possible to look at any sick or sinning or dying appearance and see through it to reality. Now, everyone who is called upon to enter the metaphysical or spiritual life, everyone who is called upon to enter it with a healing ministry, has got to be outwardly cold-blooded and inwardly overheated with love for God and man. But the love has got to be so intense that it will not yield itself to human emotion, pity, sympathy, or acceptance of appearances. If you have the experiences I have had, and I have worked in 3 prisons, in one of them for 2 years and another one for more than a year, you cannot go in there with a heart full of sympathy for prisoners, nor a heart full of emotion. You have to go in there with the ability to know thou art the Christ of God, and ignore the appearances and ignore even their appeals for sympathy, for pity. Ignore their appeals to help them get out, or to go to the governor for them, or to the parole board. Every human emotion has to be drained from one in order that the vision of Christ be realized. And then these men, filled with that vision, walk out free. So it is with our patients who are sick, who are dying, or who are poor. Brimming over with emotion for them, pitying them, sympathizing with them, or believing in the picture. That's not spiritual love. If that was spiritual love, God would feel that toward us, and He'd be pitying us and leaning down and soothing our fevered brow all the time, instead of which He ignores this whole evil human scene as if it didn't exist. And so must we. Our insulation must be so complete that our heart does not yearn or burn with sympathy for the poor and afflicted. Our heart must burn with joy for the Christ that we witness right where the evil appearance seems to be. That's the mystic life, that's the monastic life. When you are so insulated that no human emotion touches you, but where love is so marvelous that you're not concerning yourself whether it's your child or the child down the street. You're not concerned whether it's white or black or blue. Your concern only is that you are seeing Christ as individual being. You know, in the Hitler days, I had the opportunity, while in Boston, to be one of the little agencies of an underground. My chum was head of the underground in Germany against Hitler. And he used to send bags of mail to me in Boston to be redirected to other underground agencies. And I was in a position to know, as well as anybody, the nature of Hitlerism and what it was doing, and certainly to know what it was doing to the Jews. And there were people who came to my office and in the course of events spoke of current human events, who wondered why, with my Jewish blood and Jewish ancestry, that I had no hatred for Mr. Hitler, and I had none of these feelings of destruction toward him. And I had to explain this, that I'm a practitioner, a healer. And how do I know? But tomorrow he may call up on the telephone and ask for a treatment. And what could I say to him? Yesterday I wished you were dead, but today I'll tell you you're a spiritual being. Yesterday I hated you, but today I love you. And so I'll begin today to act as though you were going to call for help tomorrow. And I did, and I have. And so that even while I can witness and wish to see corrected the evils of mankind, I cannot find it possible inside to emote about these evils, more especially as I realize that collectively man has brought them upon himself. If men would give the same attention to deciding who to vote for at election time as they do to the brand of whiskey they choose, there never would be wars. They'd have intelligent men in office. But they don't. They spend more care selecting the right brand of cigarettes or tobacco or alcohol than they do in selecting their candidates for office. The candidates for office is always the right one if it's on their party side, regardless of who or what it may be. So you can't bleed too desperately for the plight of mankind, seeing that mankind has brought it upon himself. But you can love them in their blunders, you can love them in their ignorance, you can love them in their evil when you understand that they're yielding only to human sense, to personal sense, and that behind all of this is an ignorance of their true identity, and of your true identity and of mine. So it is that once you begin to perceive the nature of God's love, you will understand why the Master could say that his rain falls on the just and the unjust. Then you will begin to understand why God has more pleasure in one sinner redeemed than 99 good people walking around. And then you will begin to understand why it is that God is nothing like what men think him to be. God is a spirit. And God's love knows no emotion and no pity, but God's love is universal. And every one of us that brings ourselves into the light of God's love finds healing and redemption and saving and eternality and immortality. And we find more than this, that it's free to all of us, to people of all races, all religions, all climes, all creeds, if only they rise above this emotionalism of me and mine, the selfishness of me and mine, and rise higher into an awareness of what it is that constitutes this personal sense that keeps humanity drained, and what it is that constitutes spiritual sense that frees men and insulates them from human errors. Now, much of this sounds as if love were just a word, but not a reality. And again, I say to you, love is the greatest reality in the world, but it isn't any more what men think it is than God is what men think it is. Love is something far different from selfishness, from greed, from pity, from all of these things that would bring us down to the level of mortality instead of lifting us up into the realization of Christhood. Now the Master walked up and down all of the land of the Holy Lands, and he healed, and he forgave, and he raised the dead. But he did it always without coming down to the level of either the sin or the disease. He always held himself high above it. You can read that as you read this red letter book and immerse yourself in his words. You will find that in walking up and down that Holy Land, he didn't walk over to the side of the road to pity everybody that was there or try to heal them. He ignored them, and he gave himself only to those who ran out from the side of the road and chased after him and begged, "Master, Master, Master." heal me, do something for me. And to those he gave himself. If you have never been to the Holy Lands, and if you have not read of those lands in its earliest days, you may not know that the conditions that prevailed then prevail now, and that is that the roadsides are clogged with the poverty-stricken people of that area. The roadways are clogged with diseased people walking in and out. An automobile doesn't dare travel too fast over the roads of the Holy Land, even though there are good roads, because of the masses on the street, masses of men, women, children, and it is very evident that most of them are undernourished. It is very evident that they still have the same sores on their bodies that you read about in biblical times, because poverty is rampant over there and always has been. And if you visualize the Master walking down those roads, you will see, as you read in Scripture, that he walked straight and narrowly down the road, looking neither to right nor left, except as someone ran out from the throng and sought him. And those few he healed. He did not stoop to pitying those who were continuing to sit over where they were. So it is, we learn that, we're aware of all the sick people in New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles, physically sick, mentally sick, morally sick. We're aware of that. What can we do about it? If we could make them well, they would become sick again tomorrow by going back to their same old ways of living. And so we have to stay in an insulation that says, I recognize God, and I recognize spiritual identity, and I remain in that. And if no one comes near me for healing the rest of my days, I will not move out of my orbit looking for anyone to heal. But the very moment that someone moves out of their orbit and brings themselves into mine, I will work with them day and night until harmony is restored and God's Christhood is revealed. All of this, you see, is bringing forth God's love. But God's love, and this must be understood, it isn't God's love if you maintain in yourself condemnation. If you hold people in judgment to their faults, to their errors, to their sins. You can't do that. You can be aware of them, but don't hold them in judgment to it, because you can't heal. There is no spiritual love in condemnation. There is no spiritual love in holding a person to punishment for their offenses. There is only spiritual love in forgiveness, spiritual love in seeing through the evil, spiritual love in understanding that people only sin because of ignorance. Nobody in the world would steal if they knew they were joint heir with Christ and God to all the heavenly riches. Nobody in the world would seek satisfaction in carnal desires if they knew that God was the greatest satisfaction there is in all the world. Nobody in the world would ever be lonesome if they ever found out that God is closer than breathing, nearer than hands and feet, and oh, what a companion God can be. Once you get to know him aright, once you stop fearing that he's going to punish, once you stop hoping that he's going to reward, and get to see God as really divine love, then you will find that it's an impossibility to be lonesome. To be alone, yes, but not lonesome. To live in aloneness, yes, but never lonely, because there is always God in the midst of us. It isn't possible to be poor. No one can ever be poor who understands the love of God. You may be without money and you may be without food, but you won't be poor. And you won't be hungry, and you won't be thirsty. Contradiction? Probably so if you read it line for line, but not if you read between the lines. No one, I have never seen the righteous baking bread. No one can be poor who has God in his heart, who has an understanding of love as something that embraces all, not just yours or mine. No one can ever lack companionship, bread, wine, water, inspiration, who holds all mankind to be the very image and likeness of God, regardless of whether they themselves at the moment know it, live it, exhibit it. But to hold no man in condemnation, to hold no man in his own errors or his own faults, that's to understand the love of God. And to love like that is to be spiritually fed, spiritually clothed, spiritually housed. In that there can be no awareness of poverty, no awareness of lack, no awareness of lonesomeness, no awareness of homelessness. One could be walking the streets or sleeping in the park, but there would never be a sense of homelessness. My home really is in God. That's our real home. It's in God, not in houses, not in brick, mortar. The real home is in God. But no one can enter that spiritual household unless they can see God as the light of all creation. As long as they can come down to a human level of pity, of accepting appearances, God isn't understood as love. Be assured of this: because God is love, not even a sparrow falls. You say you've seen sparrows fall. You've even seen dead ones in the street. Yes, you've also seen hospitals and insane asylums and poorhouses. But they don't exist. They don't exist. That's all part of that insanity that is living outside of God's love. That's all part of that dream that's brought about by that Mosaic sense of God. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, and dear God, come down and slay our enemies. Annihilate those who don't love us. That's where you find all of the so-called evil conditions in the world. You do not meet them in love. You do not meet them in forgiveness. You do not meet them in releasing man from his sins and his ignorances and understanding that these aren't powers. These are just states of self-deception. Self with a small s. Oh no. The secret of life lies in gaining an understanding of the nature of God. And you never will get an understanding of the nature of God if you read too much of the Bible and too much of the metaphysical writings, because they don't reveal it. Stick closer to Jesus Christ and John until you do gain a sense of God as love, as Father. You remember what he says? If you as human parents give bread to your children, what do you think about God as a parent? You don't give your children stones when they ask for bread. Why do you think that God will give a stone in place of bread? It's because you don't know the nature of God. God doesn't give bread or stone. God gives himself, and himself is the bread of life. I am the bread and the wine and the water. God gives himself to all those who seek God, but they cannot be truthfully seeking God while they're holding their fellow man in condemnation. That is why it is that this mystical life and monastic life breeds an insulation from human pity. Why it finds no need of mother, brother, sister, father, because who is my mother and who is my father? You, my disciples. The mystic, the leader of the liver of the monastic life, finds a mother and a father and a sister and brother in every single disciple on the spiritual path. And so it makes no difference whether they have a blood relative or they don't. That isn't cold, that's warm. It sounds to the human world like coldness to deny that you need your own mother or your own child. If you stop to think a while, why should you? Isn't the other woman and the other man as equal in God as your mother or your father or your boy or your girl? And the answer is yes. Then there must be an equal tabernacling with all men's sons and daughters and all men's mothers and fathers. Well, I told you that this was going to happen, and it did.